It's Thursday, April 7th, 2016. We are 22 weeks shy of week one of the 2016 NFL season, and you are listening to Real in the Field Goals, the weekly Seahawks podcast here on fieldgoals.com with myself, Kenneth Arthur, and Danny Kelly, the managing editor. Danny, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Kenny. How are you?
I'm doing just fine and good.
Good.
Getting this out a few hours earlier than usual each week, which I'm sure the listeners do appreciate. Those of them that just cannot wait, we
Yeah.
appreciate you. So let's get right into it. We want to start a little bit of draft talk. Danny, this week on 3000 NFL Mock Draft, we talked about Rob's new formula that he had sort of taken a look at the broad jump, the vertical leap, and the bench press of offensive line and defensive line prospects, and found that the Seahawks had only drafted guys since 2012 that had fallen within this range of 3 and above. And it was not like a lot of guys fall into that. Just 6 offensive linemen this year fell into that range in all of the offensive linemen in the draft. And so we believed that it could come down in the first round to Jason Spriggs or Jermaine Ifedi, perhaps, who had just fallen right below at 297. And then a couple other guys like Joe Dahl and Joe Haig also qualified. The other guys he didn't like as much. But you go back, and even the undrafted free agents like Gary Gilliam was above a 3. They really liked, it seemed, this athleticism. Did you have any thoughts as far as Spriggs and Ifedi, or on the Seahawks, what you had already known previously about the Seahawks' feelings about how they liked their offensive linemen physically?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really cool to get that kind of worked out and look at the history of that, that what Rob did in terms of going back into 2012 and kind of seeing what the Seahawks have done. Because, I mean, obviously on the radio, I think it was last year, Tom Cable kind of confirmed like they have these certain benchmarks that they look for in their offensive linemen, whether it's broad jump 9 feet, I think, and then you said bench and what was the other one?
Vertical.
Vertical, right. So yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely clear that they have these benchmarks that they look for in terms of athleticism, and athleticism is important in the zones.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's I wrote about Gary Gilliam this morning and comparing him to Jason Peters, just again physically, and also their backgrounds of where they came out of high school as defensive linemen, then they moved to tight end, then they didn't get drafted because they were completely raw. And there were moments where Gary Gilliam was more athletic than Jason Peters, and Jason Peters, I don't know what his spark would have been. I don't know. I know that as far as the formula that Rob had come up with, Jason Peters was off the charts. I mean, he's a 330-pound guy that ran a 4.93 40.
Wow. And he went undrafted?
He went undrafted because he had
That's
never
crazy.
played tackle.
Okay.
So it was really just he was a tight end who had some blocking experience as a tight end, but he had never played. They were moving him, to tackle for the first time. And I mean, if he goes into the draft this year, a Jason Peters type, if there is a Jason Peters type out there, I mean, I know that someone had mentioned someone, and I can't recall now what the name was, but yeah, these guys that have no experience, and you're just drafting a body. But I mean, it only took Jason Peters 3 years before he was the starting left tackle in Buffalo. The 2004, 2005, and then in 2006 he was the starting left tackle in Buffalo.
That's an
And that was
interesting comp, yeah.
and it was the exact same thing. In his second year, he was the starting right tackle. In the first year, he had started one game. So
Right.
Gary Gilliam was on pretty much the exact same trajectory.
That's
He,
good.
he was just over 5 seconds, but still extremely athletic is where that athleticism comes into play. And I think there's a good chance that they do see Gilliam as the left tackle next year,
Right.
even if they do draft a right tackle or a tackle in the first round. Did you have any sort of thoughts? What were your thoughts on Gary Gilliam's performance last year? Because it can be kind of hard to judge.
Yeah. Overall, I was happy with him. Just in general, the Seahawks offensive line struggled really badly in the first half, and then in the second half they kind of figured it out and got it together. I think that he has, people always talk about offensive linemen's feet. Like, he has really good feet in terms of, he doesn't have any issue with a kick step. He's definitely smooth in that. He can He can move. You know, he's not going to get beat around the corner too badly most of the time unless he like totally mistimes the snap. Um, you know, that kind of stuff is really important. I think maybe um, his functional strength could improve a little bit in terms of, you know, not getting bull rushed. And he'll probably, you know, have a little bit of, obviously have a big learning curve going to the left side. But I think, you know, in terms of the guys on the team that I'm most confident in playing left tackle, it'd definitely be Gilliam. It sounds like he's working on all the footwork and stuff like that. You know, there was a video of him the other day lining up in the left tackle stance and doing some drills. And so I think that like his athleticism will definitely lend to that. You know, he's got more experience than pretty much everyone else. I think, you know, they got Bradley Soul coming in here to potentially, you know, compete with him for that job. But I just don't think I would trust any of the rookie. If they draft a guy, I wouldn't trust a rookie on the left side probably. And so to me, it's by far mostly, you know, the odds are it's going to be Gary Gilliam over there, and you know, I'm optimistic about it. It's going to be interesting, but I'm optimistic about it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that it's worth taking a look at, and we can't just dismiss it just simply because Gary Gilliam was undrafted. You know, we can't just
Right.
assume that a guy that's drafted is going to be, you know, there's he wasn't. It would be one thing if you have a tackle that's undrafted because he was just not that great of a tackle, or if he in college, or if he had like really poor measurables at the combine. But it's another thing when it's like this guy has football experience, but not this position football experience. The reason he was undrafted, the red flag, as it were, is that he just had no experience. So there's still potential there that we haven't seen that there's anything bad yet as far as him as a left tackle. We've never seen him at left tackle, so something to watch out for is Gary Gilliam's potential transition. And another transition taking place in the NFL this year is the Rams moving from St. Louis to Los Angeles. To talk about the Rams, to talk about the draft, we have Joe McAtee from Turf Show Times joining us again today, a friend of the show. He's got a lot of experience with all sorts of things that we've been talking about. The NFC West, of course, the draft, and athletic left tackles. Your own Greg Robinson ran a 4.92, just a hair faster than Jason Peters, and he did it at pretty much the exact same weight. Nice broad jump. Nice bench. We can talk about Greg Robinson for a while, but Joe, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. What's going on, guys?
Just chilling.
Draft, that kind of thing. What I'm curious if you've been paying, if you've heard what we've said about Jason Peters and the lack of experience in moving around and the having an athletic left tackle, because I'm sure if the Seahawks had the opportunity to draft Greg Robinson, they would have jumped all over it too. How did you feel about Greg Robinson last year?
Well, I think the problem with Greg Robinson is, remember, the Rams tried this before with a tight end converted #2 overall pick. Remember, they drafted Jason Smith back in the day coming out of Baylor, and that was the archetype that they were trying to knock out when they made that pick, and that one failed miserably. So I think a lot of people had a lot of skepticism about Greg Robinson, not necessarily because of his individual skills, but the idea of going after an athletic guy that you could project into the position versus somebody that's had some success there. Remember Greg Robinson coming out of Auburn running that kind of wonky triple option that they did with Trey Mason as the running back, Nick Marshall as quarterback. A lot of people were worried, and I think you saw some of those worries transcend to the NFL level. The other problem, of course, because it's Jeff Fisher and the Rams, and example number 1 billion trillion of why we can't have nice things. After they drafted him, they came out and said that they were going to make him a guard. Remember, Jake Long was the starting left tackle at the time, and he went into camp as essentially a backup guard to start the season. Fast forward a couple of weeks after injuries to Roger Saffold and Jake Long, which everybody knew was coming, and by week 6, Greg Robinson was your starting left tackle. Now, he hadn't gotten much NFL experience because throughout the entire preseason and training camp period, they were plugging him in at guard behind Saffold and David Joseph, who was on a 1-year free agency run. So there are ways that you can do it and ways not to do it. And I think, if anything, the Rams, as is often the case, show other teams the way not to do it. I just don't know. I don't know if that's something that's specific to the tackle position. If that should, like you said, you guys might want Greg Robinson. I don't know that it should dissuade other teams from picking a guy like that. I just know that what it should do is make sure that you have a plan on how you want to use him, and it's not what the Rams did.
Do you have high hopes for Greg Robinson going down the line? I mean, obviously his year last year was underwhelming, and at this point, it's probably getting a little worrisome. What do you think in terms of the future for him?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going into a pivotal third year. He started to put a lot of the pieces together down the stretch. Part of the problem has been, consistency along the line. The Rams have had so much turnover. They went into the draft last year knowing they needed at least 3 guys, and they pulled in total 7, spending a supplemental draft pick, to completely rebuild the line because they just hadn't really addressed it for the first couple of years under Jeff Fisher. So they went overboard. Brought in, Rob Havenstein as your starting right tackle, on Brown, rookie starting right guard. You had 2 guys that they had to go to later in the season, Cody Wickman and Andrew Donald, who they also drafted. And then they had Battle, who they kind of redshirted for whatever reason and didn't really even make the active roster, except for, I think, 2 weeks down the end when they were so depreciated by injury. So it's not like he's had the same guy playing next to him year after year to try to develop that kind of rapport that a lot of guys need, especially early on in their career. So I don't know. He's a big question mark. The Rams have a lot of them. He may be one of the biggest.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have to see, man. I mean, I'm hopeful because, when you draft a guy like that, number 2 overall, you're drafting him based on something special. And
right.
I think Greg showed it: size, speed, capability. If you've looked some of the stuff we've been posting, he's been working with LaCharles Bentley, the former NFL offensive lineman, at his training camp for offensive linemen. And you look at a guy who's shaped like that. He's not supposed to move like that. You're not supposed to be that fast. You're not supposed to be that quick and have the kind of strength numbers that you do. So he's a specimen. But at some point, you have to start translating that into actual football. And the fact that he hasn't yet is, I think, what worries everybody.
Joe, it's 7 or 8 years ago. The city of Seattle had a basketball team named the Seattle Supersonics, and that team moved up and went over to Oklahoma City. It felt more of, like it was sold to an owner that we knew was always going to take the team, so it felt like we were being gypped by a local and just sort of being screwed over because he knew he was selling it to a guy that didn't want the team in Seattle. As soon as the Sonics became the Thunder and they took Kevin Durant, they drafted Russell Westbrook, it was all set up for years of success and just feeling bitter and angry. And I think most people in Seattle said, to hell with the Sonics, we're never going to follow this team again. We don't want the Thunder. Right. We don't like any of that, and there's just bitterness. I know that you're not a St. Louis guy. You're a Rams guy, and through all the transition and the move to LA, nothing has really seemed to change for you as far as covering the Rams and rooting for the Rams and being a Rams guy. What is the overall feeling? Because I know that a lot of people are very upset with ownership, of course, and
sure.
St. Louis. But what are the feelings right now? Because I live in LA, and even I still don't really feel like the Rams are coming. It seems weird. I guess it'll have to just happen when it happens. And I don't know. I don't see anybody. I've not heard one person. I've not seen one Rams thing at all in LA.
Yeah.
What are the thoughts so far on the move to LA?
So there's a lot. I guess my own author's note here would be I was a Rams fan before they moved to St. Louis, right? So it's not that I didn't come to love St. Louis and the city for the fact that they embraced the Rams. I did. It's just that I didn't become a Rams fan when they were in St. Louis, right? So I had my own kind of bias there, and I tried to treat it fairly and treat it, equivocally, but it was tough. It was tough, and because somewhat unlike the Supersonics was that when Stan Kroenke bought the Rams, it was seen as the kind of move to keep the Rams in St. Louis. He's from Missouri. He had helped the Rams in the transition from Los Angeles to St. Louis, and so by all accounts, what most people assumed was that was the kind of move that was going to ensure the Rams were going to stay in St. Louis. I think a couple things. What didn't help was the way that the Rams ownership and the league treated the city. Instead of coming out and being honest about the fact that, kind of like the Supersonics, that they were interested in moving, that they were looking for that from the beginning. the Rams at every step made efforts to indicate that they wanted to stay in St. Louis, that they weren't even looking into Los Angeles, while at the same time they were prepared. They were greasing the wheels politically. They were doing all the kind of logistical things behind the scene to prepare for the move. Stan Kroenke was working with other owners to try to put the package together. So it was the deceptiveness, the deception of continuing to tell the public and working with the city as if there was some chance that the Rams were staying, while doing everything that they needed to do to make sure that the team moved. I think that was kind of what threw things really off. And, of course, part of the problem is, and you go back to the Sonics as the last big franchise to relocate, this is the first one in the era of, like, big social media. And I think that just made things different. You know, for me, having family being born in Los Angeles and knowing a bunch of people there, one of the weird things that came out was the idea that, there wasn't this much acrimony from Los Angeles when the Rams left for St. Louis, and there are so many, let's say, bitter St. Louis fans. Well, the difference is now you can hear those people, right? People are saying that there was no medium for people to hear from the other city, the way it exists now for Twitter and Facebook and everything else. And the fact that it was so public, I think, made things different. I guess, you know, moving forward in terms of why the city hasn't really, like you said, made as big a deal about it as they could, I think it's twofold. Number one, Stan Kroenke doesn't care about Los Angeles, right? It's not his city. It's not as if he has some big connection. It's not as if, you know, he wants to embrace the city. He wants to embrace the dollars. And you know, once he gets his campus built in Inglewood and, you know, he's able to get the revenue going, that's all he cares about. So it's not as if he's going to make these huge overtures to the city to make sure that they embrace the team. That's just not going to happen. I think the other thing is you've got a whole generation of people in Los Angeles, many of whom I'm related to that I talk to often, that never felt personally tied to the NFL because there was no team in Los Angeles growing up for them the last essentially 20 years. And that gap is something you can only overcome once football gets there. I don't think you can do it through promotion or through anticipation. You just have to get football there and get people to experience the product.
And a big part of that is winning. Obviously, I think, you know, if the Rams are winning.
Wait, you can do? They're allowed to do that?
No, not the Rams. He was being facetious. That's kind of mean, Danny. You know,
generally speaking, yes. Like, winning is important for NFL teams in general. I'm not saying the Rams because it's obviously not important to them.
It's not.
And that brings me to my question, actually. Case Keenum, Nick Foles, potentially a rookie. What's going on with the quarterback situation for the Rams this year? And try not to get too mad about it. I know that it kind of pisses you off, but
the thing is, it doesn't piss me off anymore because you have to come to terms with it, right? You just have to learn to acknowledge that that's the kind of modus operandi for this team. I mean, what I think is weird is there are so many Rams fans that assume that they're going to make these huge sweeping changes to the quarterback position. You got to remember, a year ago, the sweeping changes were to make sure that Foles, Case Keenum, and Sean Mannion were the guys. They were sure that was the trio to make things right. The idea that now, 1 year later, you would say, oh, well, we completely screwed up, right? And we're going to completely redo things. Well, you got the same people in charge. These are the same people 365 days ago who made these deals, who extended Nick Foles before the season, who traded a draft pick for Case Keenum, and who spent a third-round pick on Sean Mannion. I just don't, the logic doesn't make sense that these same people would all of a sudden say, well, none of those three are any good, even though a year ago we thought they were the perfect solution for the position for what we want to do, right? That just doesn't make any sense. I think what people have to come to terms with is that's how this Rams front office and coaching staff values the quarterback position, which isn't highly, right? They're comfortable with guys like Nick Foles and Case Keenum and a rookie with some potential as a pocket guy in Sean Mannion. And, yeah, maybe they go after another guy in the draft. Honestly, I'd be surprised if it was a first-round pick that they spent on a quarterback. But the way that they approach football and the strategy, and you were at the Combine with me, Danny. Yep. Les Snead, the general manager for the Rams, spoke about it. There are other ways to improve the football team than just at the quarterback position. And you know, there was a sincerity in his remarks that he repeated multiple times on that topic, that they really feel comfortable doing things in other positions. And that's why they never even spent a backup pick for Sam Bradford, even after he hurt his ACL. Going into the second year after hurting his ACL, they went all in on Sam Bradford without bringing anybody else in besides Sean Hill. I mean, it's indicative of how much they value the quarterback position. And I think, the more that we understand that that's just what it is, and they're not going to budge, the less we have to assume that, they view Nick Foles and Case Keenum and Sean Mannion as some kind of underwhelming trio. It's not necessarily underwhelming. It's just appropriate for what they're trying to do. Whether or not that works, I don't think results are necessarily going to change their approach because they haven't thus far, and I just don't see why that would change.
We talked about this at the Combine, too. The Broncos kind of stole the idea of what the Rams were trying to do. In terms of really great defense, great pass rush, really good defensive line, middling to terrible quarterback play, and they still won a Super Bowl. How did they do that, and the Rams have managed to not get over 500 for the last however many years?
I mean, that's right. That's the question, right? Is how did the Broncos go 5-2 with Brock Osweiler? And I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. It's clearly the difference between successful teams and unsuccessful ones. And that's the thing is, I don't think Les Snead and Jeff Fisher are necessarily wrong about their approach. I just think the execution has been lacking. Right. And the fact that they haven't been able to do it doesn't necessarily undercut the strategy or the approach. It just means maybe they're not the best guys to make it successful. And that's the difficult part is when you see a team like the Broncos pivot and make things work, that you have to ask, well, how are the Rams possibly going to do it if they've had this much time and this much opportunity to do it and still aren't doing it? So I don't know. I think it's frustrating to see another team go ahead and build out their roster and make it work to the degree that you win a Super Bowl, let alone a winning record.
Right.
But if nothing else, at least it validates the idea that you could make it work.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like when you look at the Seahawks, I think you can see like with the Seahawks that they had the talent, the young talent, and then it gets older and it gets better. And I think you can look at the Rams and say like, hey, they're actually drafting well now, or at least they're getting some good talent in. And you look at it and you say, Todd Gurley is a very talented player who could be a great running back, and you look at it and you say Greg Robinson, maybe he's going to be great. Aaron Donald already is great. Trumaine Johnson, they just, re-signed, or they got him on the tags, or they think he's going to be great. You did lose Janoris Jenkins, but Trumaine Johnson, 2 years younger, maybe probably better. Robert Quinn, but everything that you look at it, even if you look at the Seahawks now, they have Earl Thomas. He comes from 2010. Cam Chancellor was drafted in 2010. You look at 2011, Richard Sherman. There doesn't seem to be anybody on the Rams right now that is talented, that is, came onto this team before like 2013. So it's still a really like young team, right? Like, what are your expectations if you look at it and you say we have some good guys, but we still don't have a quarterback, and we have just young guys. So even the guys that are good, like Aaron Donald, can only do so much. Brockers and Quinn can only do so much. How do you set your expectations when you feel like you have players that you like, but that they're just still super young?
Yeah, I think it's tough. I mean, that's part of the problem is that the Rams, you go back to Jeff Fisher's first year with the RG3 trade, the size of the haul was ridiculous, right? Extra first-round picks. The trades that they made to be able to stack up even more second-round picks, even though guys like Isaiah Pede and Brian Quick never made good on that kind of draft promise, they still had a haul that was near the top of the draft. The problem is that, like you pointed out, it's been all young guys with potential. And the real issue now for Jeff Fisher is that going into year 4 with guys like Janoris Jenkins and Rodney McLeod, you're starting to lose your own guys. Now it's not, we've got problems from the previous roster that we're going to have to fix. Now you're having to fix your own holes. And at some point, all that potential, like you said, gets thrown out the window because it remains potential forever. You've got, and that's the real issue, is that they've got to find a way to make good on guys like Janoris Jenkins and Robert Quinn and Chris Long, James Laurinaitis, 2 guys that they now released. Those guys had their peaks, and the Rams didn't make the most out of it. How do they do that moving forward with such a young team and you're shedding veterans like Long, Laurinaitis, and tight end Jared Cook? I don't know, because you're getting younger. You're losing veterans in the locker room, and you're losing guys who know how to win, because now with every single guy that you draft, you're coming into, and let's be blunt about it, a culture of losing, right? A culture that doesn't know what it's like to put together a 16-game season, a 17-week regular season, and end up with a winning record, and how to approach the playoffs and how to gear up for a playoff run. There's nobody on the roster that knows how to do that now, and that's worrisome. That you don't have a bunch of guys in the locker room who can bring along a young team, but it's one of those things where it's not going to happen until it does, and I don't know when that switch goes. I don't know how you get over that hump, but you got to assume that almost on odds alone that eventually the Rams have to bumble and stumble their way almost accidentally into a winning record, at which point, okay, now maybe they've learned something and now maybe they have turned a corner, but it's hard to see how that's going to happen before it does.
Kind of related to that, and I haven't followed him real closely, but has the narrative changed on Tavon Austin in however many years he's been in the league now? It kind of seems like he got a little bit better. They started using him a little bit better last year, but do people feel like he's actually, at this point, going to be like a good player in the NFL?
I mean, I hope not. Again, at some point, the potential just remains potential, right? I don't know that Tavon Austin was any better last year. I think the difference was the quantity. The Rams forced him into the game plan to a much heavier degree. I think part of that was the fact that they had gone on to a new offensive brain trust. Remember, Brian Schottenheimer had been the only offensive coordinator for Jeff Fisher while he had been in St. Louis. Last year was his first year gone. Of course, he goes to the University of Georgia and dismantles that program in 1 year and gets everybody fired, which should tell you something about Brian Schottenheimer. But for the Rams, they moved on to Frank Cignetti initially, and then he gets fired midseason. They go ahead and move over to Rob Boris, who had been the tight end coach. Both of them certainly felt the pressure to make sure that Tavon Austin was shoehorned into the offensive game plan, and they did that. But they did it almost at the cost of any kind of balance, right? So that essentially by week 4, week 5, your entire offense was Tavon Austin and Todd Gurley. That's not necessarily difficult for teams to defend, and that's how you end up with the 32nd ranked offense in the NFL. I don't know how you change that, because as everybody knows, those are the best 2 weapons that you've got. You lost Jared Cook. Brian Quick comes back on a 1-year deal. He's not worrying anybody. Kenny Britt certainly isn't a huge threat. But you got to find a way to get some balance into the offense. Otherwise, everybody knows just to key in on Gurley and Austin and make sure that you get off the field. It was far too easy last year. As much as we saw Tavon Austin, to know that as long as you can limit him to those shorter gains, there's nothing really to worry about the Rams offense.
Tavon Austin had 21 carries, go for 10 or more yards. That's about 40% of his carries. He did have, a good number of 2 yards or less. I would say about 15, just looking at it here with the raw eye. But some negatives. Do you like it when Tavon Austin carries the ball? It seems like is it enough give and take for you to get the advantage? 8.3 yards per carry, but is it an advantage, or is it just like a thing that, okay, great, we picked up 1 first down, and then we're going to punt it 3 plays later because we have nothing else?
And that was kind of the problem, was that more the use of Tavon Austin last year saw him out of the backfield on reverses and sweeps and stuff like that. They had tinkered around with this idea of Tavon Austin as kind of a conventional running back to come and play through the middle, which, why would you throw a guy of Tavon Austin's size towards defensive tackles? That's just cruel and unusual. That doesn't. But for everybody, for Tavon Austin and for fans, nobody even wants to see him do that. But that was the Rams' model, was to whoever you plug back there. Look, you've got 3 running plays, pick one and go. That just didn't work for Tavon Austin. So at least one of the things that we saw more frequently was a lot of jet sweep action for him coming around the outside. And as long as you got the block set up, that was what could free him on some of those longer runs, which helped the bigger average. I think the bigger problem was that they didn't get something more out of him in the receiving game. For somebody who's got the speed he does and the versatility he does, you got to get him involved downfield more. And I think that was the bigger issue. Was the balance with the running game was great, and it's like you said, you get one of those and then you get another set of downs, but then you got to make good on that, and you can't just keep running him on sweeps. Eventually, they're going to pick up on it. The variety that you can get in there is beneficial as it is to pick up that first down, requires you to get something downfield, and that's where they struggled.
I still don't really know how I feel about the whole running back in round 1 question, but I think you make a pretty good argument against it, and I know how you feel about the Todd Gurley pick last year. I think obviously he's a great player, but like you said, 32nd ranked offense in the NFL, and he had a good year. So
yeah, he had a great year after he came back off the injury. And especially the fact that he played behind the Rams' offensive line. I think if you had put him on a stronger team with a stronger complementary offense, he could have even put up even better numbers.
Right.
And I think that's the problem, is that when you've got a running back that talented, innately and individually talented, and he puts up a Rookie of the Year season and crosses 1,000 yards, having missed the first 4 games, that tells you how limited that position is to provide offensive value. It's not his fault. I mean, and I'm not equating running backs to kickers or punters or tight ends, but there's a reason why you don't draft those guys incredibly highly. It's because the position is limited in terms of how much it can affect the offense. And it's not even me. I think Todd Gurley is maybe the best example of that. Right. Is that you can have somebody come out and have a great rookie season, and the offense will still be horrible. Like that's not that these aren't me being overwhelmingly negative or anything. That's just a reality. The Rams had the worst offense in the NFL with a great rookie running back. And I think that kind of spells out the value of the position and the impact it had.
I mean, you look at you could say that Adrian Peterson might be the best running back of all time, and the only time he even made it to the conference championship game, they had Brett Favre and Sidney Rice, and they were one of the best passing games in the NFL. It just does not make any sense to bulk up and say, well, we've got to get this great running back, because even then, even if you did get a great running back, like I think Thomas Rawls had a great season, and there's an undrafted free agent. We're going to talk today about maybe some of the second, third, and day 3 picks in the draft at running back that we like, and I think there's lots of guys to like. To take one, I mean, we had this long conversation during the draft last year when the Rams took Gurley and when the Chargers took Melvin Gordon, and it's just like, what are you doing? You're in the top 10 and you're taking a running back. If that's your decision, that's your decision. He could be great, and he was great. Todd Gurley was great, but it's certainly, I think that was the whole point, was A, they are available later, and B, it's just not it's not as valuable towards winning games.
And especially for Rams fans, I mean, we know well, and you guys probably remember, Steven Jackson had a phenomenal career. Mm-hmm. He played on some of the worst teams I've ever seen. I mean, the Rams had the worst 5-year stretch in NFL history from 2007 to 2011, and it wasn't because of Steven Jackson. He was, putting up 1,500 yards a year. It's just the position is limited, and it just doesn't make sense to allocate a high first-round pick to that anymore.
So how are you going to feel when Zeke Elliott goes, in the top whatever? I mean, I don't know. Where do you think he's going to go, just based on all that?
You have to learn to. You have to learn to embrace it. You have to learn to embrace the cat. Here's the thing. Trey Mason got involved in an incident in the offseason where he actually got tased. I didn't know if you guys saw that.
I didn't hear about that.
Yeah, and so there's probably some kind of discipline coming for him early on in the season, and the brass hasn't been incredibly vocally supportive of him recently. So I wouldn't be surprised if they spent a day 2 pick on a new backup running back to spell Todd Gurley. I mean, here's the thing. Especially if you look at the Rams' MO, it makes sense, right? Yeah. They drafted Zach Stacy. They drafted Darrell Richardson. They drafted Isaiah P. They drafted Trey Mason. They drafted Todd Gurley. And all they're left with is Trey Mason. And if they're ready to move on from him, they need a new backup running back.
Man.
So I wouldn't be surprised. I don't think it's going to be Ezekiel Elliott. No. You ask me where I think he goes, it sounds like somebody's going to spend a first-round pick on him. I don't know who, and I don't know why, but for the Rams, I could definitely see a round 2 or round 3. You got to remember they got 2 round 2 picks, 43 and 45th overall.
Yeah, they got a lot of ammo.
They got a ton. They got 4 picks in the top 70. So
and usually they're blanks.
Yeah, well, I mean that's the Rams, but that's the point is that they got a chance at least to go and shoot at a target for running back. Y'all would love it. I can see it happening.
Let's do this transition to the draft. Let's forget about the Rams and the Seahawks for a minute. Just think about the draft, Joe, because you're a big college football guy. You're a big draft guy. Just it can be in the first round. It can be in the 7th round. Who are some guys in the draft this year that you're just absolutely enamored with?
Oh man, it's tough. I think you got 3 different groups. You got this whole top group separated, maybe in the top 20 picks or so. Because I don't think it's a very top-heavy draft. There's only a couple guys, maybe Laramie Tunsil, Jalen Ramsey, and Miles Jack might be the only ones who are kind of the sure hits. Other than that, you've got this big crop of maybe about 24 guys thereafter. I mean, you guys have seen the mock drafts. Everybody's all over the place. You can kind of plug and play different guys in different positions. I don't know that I'm in love with almost any of them. I like Mackenzie Alexander a lot, the guy I had the Rams taken in the SBN Bloggers mock. Cornerback out of Clemson. He's just a redshirt sophomore, but real aggressive for his size. I love his game. The defensive tackle class for that group is stacked. You know, you got Sheldon Rankins, Ashawn Robinson, Andrew Billings out of Baylor. Jerron Reed is out of Alabama, too, played right next to Ashawn Robinson. In any other draft, if he's got his head on at the end of his career, he's probably a top 5 pick. But, you know, for teams like the Rams that are willing to spend on guys that maybe have some off-field locker room issues, he's somebody that you can get for a great price. Noah Spence, similarly, somebody who got, you know, booted out of Ohio State with some better, you know, personality, you know, off-field mentoring, whatever you want to say. He's a guy that could have been near the top. I mean, he's a top 10 talent, but with his knee, I mean, you heard it when we were there, Danny, that they were talking about the fact that he just didn't medically check out, and he's probably going to have to take all of 2016 off. Otherwise, he's a top 5, top 10 pick himself. So there's tons of talent up there. It's just a lot of it is plug and play. Once you get past that, I think you can go almost 60 picks therein for kind of the day 2, fringe day 3 guys. And you look at the quarterbacks. I mean, that's where somebody's going to have to figure out what you do with these guys. Connor Cook,
right?
Christian Hackenberg. Who else? Brandon Doughty out of Western Kentucky. I don't know where these guys are going to go or where it's going to make sense because the questions about them are so huge. Dak Prescott out of Mississippi State. Somebody's going to take a look at him.
Cardale Jones.
Cardale Jones is another one. I mean, huge upside, but then huge questions too, right? I guess some of the guys that I like near the back end of the draft, that's where I start getting into the interior line. I like this center class a lot, which is something you don't hear a lot, but Jack Allen coming out of Michigan State, Evan Boehm coming out of Missouri. Who else? You got Graham Glasgow, the guard out of Michigan. He's going to be a nice pick. Isaac Seumalo from Oregon State. I mean, once you get into rounds 4, 5, and 6, I think you're going to see some really solid interior line prospects. It's one of those things where it's about fit too, right? So when you look at the wide receivers for the Rams, you know, you can get all excited. I don't think it's a great wide receiver class. So if I look at the rest of the league, that may be, you know, somewhere where I don't like these guys in general, but for the Rams, as thirsty as I am for wide receiver talent, I could say, oh yeah, that guy's going to be great.
Who are some of those mid-rounders that you like there?
Oh, it's tough. I mean, you got 2 different kinds, right? You got the bigger, more physical, maybe traditional guys, and then you got the Tavon Austin kind of speedy guys. So guys like Corey Coleman, some of the smaller guys. Who else? Pharaoh Cooper out of South Carolina. Sterling Shepard.
Yeah,
Shepard's another guy. Some of those smaller guys, you know, I think in the right offense could be really productive. It's not going to happen with the Rams. The bigger guys are where it gets tough to project because you don't know when he's going to be a Brian Quick, when he's just going to be a big body, or when they're going to be able to put some skills behind it. So you look at guys like Will Fuller and Tyler Boyd, Michael Thomas, Braxton Miller out of Ohio State's another interesting guy, Leonte Carew from Rutgers. I don't know which one of those guys is going to hit, man. It's interesting. A lot of those guys at the back end of the draft I like for, you know, a high upside. Kieras Garrett out of Tulsa. Aaron Burbridge out of Michigan State. He had a great career up in Lansing. Malcolm Mitchell at Georgia. If he hadn't gotten hurt, and again, that's, you know, one of those things that we just don't know is how did the medical check on him go. He's another guy that could be a real high upside. Thomas Duarte out of UCLA. I think he measured in at 6'3". He might have. So he's got height. Derunya Wilson out of Mississippi State. DeMarcus Robinson. I remember, you know, going into week 3 or 4 for the college game, a lot of people were looking at DeMarcus Robinson as a potential first-round pick. So there's plenty of talent at the back end of the draft. It's just going to be interesting to see where those guys land, what kind of time they get going into the season. Because I think as the Rams showed, just because you've got a high-end pick that has that kind of career and that skill set, you got to be able to put them in the right system.
Yeah, it seems interesting because a lot of mock drafts and a lot of people they use the Rams as the team to trade up, and it seems like a lot of them are putting the Rams up, and I think mostly for a quarterback. If it's going to be in that range, it would seem like Paxton Lynch might be the 3rd quarterback off the board. I'm trying to temper. I want to ask you also about your secondary because I have so many questions about it, and I'm sure maybe you do too, maybe, or people that do. Mostly I just don't know who these guys are, and I'm like, I look at Russell Wilson and I say, hey, this guy is coming off one of the best seasons last year. It's got to be a focus for everyone in the division to do something to contain him. And I think the Rams, they did that better than anyone else because they have Aaron Donald. Because we saw it with Kawan Short in the playoffs against the Panthers, that if you can disrupt the interior of the offensive line, you can get to Russell Wilson. You can cause problems. It's not really necessarily about the secondary, though. You lose Janoris Jenkins, you keep Tremaine Johnson. Is Tremaine Johnson a franchise cornerback? Is he on that? Are we going to talk about him next year in the way that we talked about Josh Norman last year?
I don't know. It's tough. The thing that makes it tough for True to say is that the 2014 season was one where the Rams made him the third quarterback. They had already drafted LaMarcus Joyner to be the guy in the slot, but then they had E.J. Gaines, a sixth-round pick, come in. Tremaine got hurt in the preseason. E.J. Gaines steps up, and he holds down on the outside so well that Tremaine Johnson was unable to crack the starting lineup, and it was E.J. Gaines and Janoris Jenkins for most of the season. So it wasn't until last year where E.J. Gaines had a Lisfranc injury before the preseason even started that Tremaine got back into the starting lineup and playing across some Janoris. He kind of became the guy to really step up. I think you have to ask how much of that was because of Janoris Jenkins and how much he was forcing throws to the other side, because Jenkins was the guy who was most commonly facing other teams' number one wide receiver. Uh-huh. So I just don't know. I think one of the other aspects is that Janoris Jenkins as a corner, but also Rodney McLeod, who we lost to the Eagles, are incredibly physical for their positions. Jenkins being a cornerback and Rodney McLeod kind of being, most people would list him as a free safety, but he didn't really play free as much. He was more the same kind of responsibilities as T.J. McDonald, just kind of splitting sides of the field. So I just wonder, when you lose that much physicality, and the question mark of Janoris Jenkins being gone, which is something the Rams haven't had to really deal with, I don't know how Tremaine's going to respond to that. The Rams went out and signed Cody Sensabaugh as kind of a filler on the back end of the cornerback depth chart because they didn't really have anybody else. Tremaine coming off a great season but had that injury in 2014. E.J. Gaines had the injury in 2015. And LaMarcus Joyner, they've kind of relegated to a slot duty only. Some people think he might move back to safety to kind of fill that spot from Rodney McLeod, but then you got another hole at cornerback. I don't know what the cornerback and the secondary as a whole is going to look like. I think that could be something we figure out in the draft. Of course, part of the problem is that just like running back, the cornerback position has been one that the Rams overdrafted under Jeff Fisher as well. Second-round pick for Jenkins, third-round pick for Tremaine Johnson, second-round pick for LaMarcus Joyner. They spent a ton of capital on cornerback, and they still haven't really figured it out.
Who are Cody Davis and Christian Bryant?
Those are guys. Those are men. They're players. they're employees of the Rams. They're special teams guys. You can't plug them long-term at the back of the defense. I think, if anything, the guy that's best in line to take over for Rodney McLeod would be Maurice Alexander. He got some spot duty last year, incredibly physical as well. I think the problem is that you don't have a lot of cover skills at the back. That was the biggest deficiency from Rodney McLeod. That's the real issue for T.J. McDonald. It's certainly an issue for Maurice Alexander. And if you put him at the back with T.J. McDonald, I don't know how the Rams are going to be able to defend some long passes with any consistency.
The NFC West has long kind of been known for their identity of toughness, physicality. I think the Seahawks and the Cardinals are definitely going to be good again next year, I would guess. I think the Rams, despite what Joe might tell you, they could be good. At least get over 500 next year, depending on kind of what happens with the quarterback. When you look around the NFL, what other divisions do you think look really good this year? Like, are there any divisions that are kind of up and coming in your mind?
I think the AFC East. It's a little preempted to say, but who's the worst team in the East? You got to assume, is it the Dolphins? And if so, that's a really good worst team. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I know they won 6 games last year, but certainly on the potential when you've got Ryan Tannehill installed as your quarterback, you got a bunch of young talent on offense. They got to figure out the running back position. But again, if that's the biggest hole that you got on your team, that's a good thing.
Right.
They got everything else filled out on defense. They're coming along nicely, so I could see them putting together a decent season. The problem is that they're in the same division as the Patriots, resurgent Jets team, and even the Bills, who look like they could be on the verge too. So that's a real strong division. The North is tough because everybody always believes in Baltimore, but they were really bad last year. They were a really bad team. If they get it back together, at least you're 3 deep between Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, and Baltimore. That makes that a real tough division because I don't think anybody's going to buy into the Browns.
No.
The rest of the AFC, I don't know. Oakland would have to get over the hump, and I don't know if San Diego can do that while Kansas City maintains. And who knows what Denver's going to be? So I don't really buy the AFC West. And the South similarly has some teams that could really fall apart. Houston could certainly be one of those teams to go from the playoffs to near the bottom of the league if they don't have things come together. The NFC West, I mean, you guys know it. There's no reason why it shouldn't be one of the strongest again. I think the real wild card there is the 49ers. I think we know what kind of a team the Rams are going to be. We know what kind of team you guys in Arizona is going to be. Who knows what the 49ers get out of year one of I get that he got ran out of Philadelphia, but 2 out of his 3 seasons with the Eagles were 10-win seasons. If that's the kind of thing you're looking at from the 49ers, that's going to make things really tough for both you guys, us, and the Cardinals. I think the other one is the NFC North. I don't know how this is going to work out between the Vikings, the Lions, and the Bears. I mean, obviously with the Packers and Aaron Rodgers, you assume they're going to be in there every year as long as he's there. But between those other 3, I don't know how that division shakes out. Maybe the Lions get it together. Cutler's such a wild card. Who knows what you're going to get there? I think maybe the most fun division, and you could make an argument that it was last year too, is the NFC East between Washington and the Cowboys. Well, that's the thing is you just don't know what's going to happen, and so I think it's kind of interesting to see who's going to come out of that division. Now that Chip Kelly's gone, I sure as hell don't have a projection there.
It's interesting. Last night I was bored, I guess, and I saw someone talking about or I just came across something about it's the Browns QB situation since 1999, and how they're going with another probably they could be going to Robert Griffin. It'll be their 25th starter or whatever, and so I just went to every single team back to 1999 and I listed their starting QB for every year. So it's basically the majority starting QB, the guy that started the most games for that year. Jay Cutler has been starting for the Bears since 2009. He's been starting for the Bears as long as almost anyone has been starting for any team. It's super weird. I mean, if you look back, Tom Brady missed all of 2008. So Tom Brady and Jay Cutler have been starting the most as well, just the same amount of consecutive seasons. The longest being, I think, Ben Roethlisberger being with one team at 12 years. But it's crazy how long Jay Cutler really has been the Bears starter. He's by far the franchise leader in pretty much every category for quarterback. And I don't know, it almost seems like his career in Chicago is somewhat of a blip, it feels like.
I don't mean to be rude, but is Jay Cutler the Jeff Fisher of quarterbacks?
That's very rude, and yeah.
That's good, I like that.
It just seems like he's always there. He's never bad enough to get rid of. He's never good enough to be excited about, but he's always dependably, mediocre, acceptably bland?
I like that.
The teams that have had the most, just for what it's worth, the teams that have the most different starting quarterbacks since 1999, the Browns have had 12 different full-time starting quarterbacks in that 17 seasons, 99 to 2015, 16, 17. All right, 12. The Bucks and the Bills have each had 11, and the Dolphins have had 10. Meanwhile, the Packers have had 2. If you go back to 1992, the Packers have had just 2 quarterbacks. Brett Favre. And it's interesting also in how many divisions there's like this incestuous relationship with quarterbacks playing for 2 or 3 teams within a division. Your Chad Penningtons or your Drew Bledsoes. It's just lots of interesting stuff when you look at it like that. But the Rams, if we go down to the Rams, the funny thing to me is Kurt Warner was a starter for the Rams for 3 years. Mark Bulger was a starter for the Rams for 8 years. The Mark Bulger era is way bigger than the Kurt Warner era. And now we go to, and then there was the Sam Bradford era, the Austin Davis era, and and then the Nick Foles era. If you could make we talked about quarterbacks earlier, and we talked about the possibility of a Paxton Lynch, Jared Goff, or Carson Wentz. Would they trade up for him? Do you have an idea of who you think I know they've talked about Case Keenum. who's going to be the Rams. Who's going to be the Rams starter in Week 1, and who's going to be the Rams starter, let's say, in Week 17?
Well, I think those are two different guys, right? I feel more confident saying that whoever it is in Week 17 and Week 1, I don't know who those will be, but I think they'll be two different people. I don't know. It's hard to get a sense of where this franchise is a lot of time on things like that because they're so it's not necessarily dishonest with the media and with the public. It's just that they don't play their cards a lot of time. Everybody thought that Sean Mannion was going to be an option going into the season. He never was, and then after the season was over, the Rams general manager Les Snead came back and said, we probably should have had a quarterback competition. Like, oh, well, okay, I guess that's one way to do it if you're an NFL GM, is completely bungle the opportunity and then afterwards say, yeah, I could have done my job better. Oh, okay, that's heartening to know. So I don't know necessarily that they're going to get it right this time. I think the best thing to do would be to throw them all in a group in training camp and just see who's playing best going into Week 1. But they tend to be more of the mindset to set these guys in stone going into the preseason and then riding them out into Week 1. The only position they didn't do that with last year was the center position, where they had 3 guys who they kept rotating day by day, whether it was a practice day or whether it was a preseason game day. They went through all of training camp rotating Tim Barnes, Barrett Jones, and Demetrius Rainey. Ultimately, it was Tim Barnes who won out the position, and he didn't really get installed as a starter until after the 4th preseason game going into Week 1. So that being the case, what they have shown is a proclivity for not starting rookies. Todd Gurley obviously was injured, but he had to wait. Go back a year prior, Aaron Donald didn't start in Week 1. Greg Robinson didn't start Week 1, so those are 2 first-round rookies who didn't get a start. LaMarcus Joyner didn't start, the second-round cornerback from the 2014 draft. And, of course, Trey Mason didn't start either. So you had 4 rookies in those first 3 rounds. None of them got to start to open the season. That's kind of more of an MO than anything. So I think if I was going to make some kind of prediction, maybe Week 17 the starter will either be Sean Mannion or some rookie to be determined. But I guess for Week 1 it's either going to be Keenum or Foles. And if I had to bet, it's probably Keenum only because they made such a public commitment to him to this point.
You made your you referenced Mackenzie Alexander for the SB Nation mock draft. I will note Ezekiel Elliott went 4th overall in that, sorry, never mind. I'm thinking of the Inside the Pylon mock draft,
right,
which was also a lot of fun. But anyways, I'm getting off topic here. In your top 15, obviously the Rams are the 15th pick. Who are some other guys that you like a lot? And kind of what positions do you like there? What's the best and worst case scenario for that 15th overall pick?
For the Rams you're talking about? For my favorite top 15 or just guys? Oh, well, I think,
for the Rams.
I think there's 2 ways you can take it, right? Is what do I expect the Rams, and this is kind of how I answered the Mackenzie Alexander thing, was what do I expect the Rams to do and what do I wish they'd do? And what I wish they would do is what I wish they'd done the last 3 years, is try to get some wide receivers or a quarterback. Unfortunately, they've waited this long, and now you come into a season where the top 15 doesn't look all that great in the case of wide receivers and quarterback. But more than anything, you'd like to have as many of those options on the board. So, if there's a way for Jared Goff, Carson Wentz to get through the first 14 picks, for Laquan Treadwell to make it all the way down to the Rams so that they got a shot at least drafting him, I think that's maybe what serves them best. Maybe you get lucky and one of those surefire guys, Jalen Ramsey or Miles Jack, falls far enough that there's a chance the Rams can maybe trade up for him.
That would piss me off so much. God damn
it. It would piss you off, but wouldn't it be the most Rams thing is to get another quality defender, and put him on that side of the ball, maybe win Rookie of the Year, and the Rams would still be a 7-win team. So that's kind of what I see as more likely as a defensive pick. That's why I took Alexander. I can certainly see a defensive lineman or a linebacker because you've got some holes, especially if you look past 2016, there's some serious holes that they're going to have to deal with on the defense so they could draft for the future. I think the real issue is that they've got more immediate needs on the offensive side of the ball to deal with.
Is there any chance that Joey Bosa drops to 15?
I think there's a chance.
Yeah.
Right? I think there's a chance. You got to have the right guys maybe move on from him, but I think there's a chance. He's a quality prospect, and he should be probably top 8. But, DeForest Buckner, somebody looking for immediate defensive end help could choose Buckner over Bosa. You got a couple guys who could go in front of him for some other teams that maybe don't need a defensive end. Now maybe you get down to 8, 9, 10 if for whatever reason somebody picks Shaq Lawson or who am I thinking of? Maybe some other defensive ends. He's probably the only maybe Kevin Dodd. You get a wild card. I call him the wackadoo picks. Maybe you get Kevin Dodd, the wackadoo at 10 or 11, or Noah Spence.
Right.
And if that's enough to push Joey Bosa down, maybe he does end up getting to 15. Now, I wouldn't be shocked at all if if Joey Bosa's there at 12, 13. I mean, I don't know if they could wait till 15, but he would be an obvious heir apparent for incredibly stupid reasons for Christmas. Just like the worst reasons of all time, but I could certainly see it happening, right?
And I mean, I'm also there's some guys that I think over, at least with me and Rob Staten, guys that he's convinced me on, or guys that we're starting to like, and get your opinion. Tyler Ervin, running back at San Jose State, is considered very small for the running back position, but he was also one of the most productive players in all of college football. He's extremely athletic. He can actually run the ball up the gut. He's not necessarily a guy that only has to be able to catch the ball or return kicks. What are your thoughts on Tyler Ervin?
He's wiggly, man. I like the little wiggly running backs, especially now in this era of the NFL where you don't need a workhorse guy to play all 3 downs. He's the kind of guy that fits, right? I mean, certainly behind a guy like Todd Gurley, or you guys got your own powerhouse backs over there. I could see it working. I think the real clue is how are you going to use him in the passing game? Because that's where I could see him having a lot of value in the NFL. As somebody who can take stuff out of the side on the backfield and turn things up. Because, I mean, his 40, was it in the 4.3s?
I think it was.
Yeah, I mean, he's got plenty of speed. He's plenty of quick. I could certainly see him being a functional part of an NFL offense by week 1, just because he's got the kind of skills that you can use as a complementary piece that you don't have to rely on.
Go ahead.
Well, I got a few more that I want to get out for Joe's opinion.
Okay, do it.
Offensive line, Joe Dahl, Washington State. He's played tackle at Washington State, but perhaps could be a guard at the next level.
Yeah, I mean, he's interesting. He's a big guy. Offensive line's tough, man, especially when you get into those middle rounds, because you don't know how guys are going to fit. I mean, you look at the Rams last year, they took so many guys that it was impossible to know how those guys were going to fit, and I think Jamon Brown was a huge pick. Andrew Donald and Cody Wickman I saw a lot of teams that were high on the Rams get him, and they just stash him at the back end of the depth chart. So he's somebody I could see fitting. I'd like to see him against more functional opponents than what he faced a lot of the time. I mean, take somebody like Joe Haig out of North Dakota State.
Love him.
I have no idea. I love him because he played at North Dakota State and he was clearly better than his opposition. But I don't know what you're going to do when you plug him into the NFL. Or what's the guy out of Harvard? There's that offensive tackle coming out of Harvard. Yes, Stephen. That's correct. Stephen Hawking is a prospect. He's incredibly slow. He's got a 48-second 40 time. But there's an offensive tackle out of Harvard that I've seen a lot of people mock 3rd, 4th, 5th round. I just don't know how you translate offensive line skills, because it's so much harder to detect than a wide receiver, where you can see him do individual work against a cornerback downfield. So much of offensive line is kind of space sharing and being able to hand guys off at the right time in the right way. And it's one of those things where I struggle to really get a sense of who's better at it than others.
Anthony Fabiano is the Harvard guy I think you're thinking of.
Oh, what's his name?
Anthony Fabiano.
Fabiano's there, but there's another guy. It's
Oh, okay.
It starts with a T. His last name starts with a T. I forget what it is, though.
What about Derrick Henry?
Well, okay. Look, oh man. See,
Cole Toner.
Cole Toner. That was the Harvard guy.
I'm sorry.
Cole Toner. God, it's a great name. But yeah, I just have no idea what Toner. The thing that makes Henry tough, and this is me personally, I thought Trent Richardson was going to be one of the best running backs of his generation, and he was arguably the biggest running back bust of the last 15 years.
Yeah.
So it's tough, and those are different guys. Derrick Henry isn't Trent Richardson, but it's one of those things where there's something about Alabama's running game where in college it just looks unstoppable, and it makes the guys look ridiculous. I mean, Mark Ingram looked like a beast when he was in college, and then you guys saw the picture of him standing next to Derrick Henry before the championship game. Yeah. It's just silly looking. It's silly looking. Yeah, so when you see Derrick Henry, you want to think, okay, well, this is somebody that nobody wants to tackle, period. How do you plug him into an NFL offense with any reservation? And I just don't know. I don't. Especially, I mean, you talked about Tyler Ervin. If you've got that kind of a guy on your roster, I don't know why you wouldn't spend a round 2 pick on somebody like, Derrick Henry, if you feel that the running game is maybe the biggest need, because he's that kind of guy that can automatically give you a power running game.
I guess we talked a lot about athleticism, and this week on the podcast, Rob, he'd sort of worked out a formula that he had found out that the Seahawks, if with plugging in the broad jump, the vertical leap, and the bench press, and put it into this formula, and found that only a few guys, or a handful of offensive linemen, had really fallen a 3 or above. It's graded a 3 or above in this formula, and every single one that the Seahawks have drafted since 2012 had fallen into this 3 or above formula. So we believe that that they're really focusing on perhaps these 6 or 7 or 8 guys. A couple of them. One of the other guys, there were really 6 guys that qualified, and then a 7th that was a defensive line to offensive line project, perhaps, and then the 8th was Jermaine Fady, who had just been a 2.97, so just below. Thoughts on Jermaine Fady and Jason Spriggs, who was by far the most athletic tackle at the Combine?
Yeah, they're both incredibly athletic. I do like this idea of Rob coming up with weird formulas to explain. He seems like the kind of guy that comes up with formulas, just constantly.
It's a UK thing.
I found out that if you take somebody's height and multiply it by the shoe size, like Rob, what are you talking about? When divide that by 2, it will give you the best backup tight end for the Seattle. Like, okay, man, I love Rob. I don't know, man. Yeah, you guys, I just don't know. The offensive line is so different because Russell Wilson, because of his requirement, right, to extend plays. You almost need somebody who can stick with plays longer. So you can't get the kind of mauling guy that a lot of the Rams, the Cowboys, a lot of teams like the Steelers, the kind of offensive line that they like, because you guys almost need somebody to keep running with the game. Mm-hmm. So I think those would certainly make sense, and maybe that's why Rob's formula works so well. Is because you've got to have some athleticism to be able to keep up with the play. When the average offensive play for you guys, I'm assuming, is going to last much longer than the Rams, who have such a direct offense.
What about and Danielle just got a couple more here. You got Stanford receiver Devin Cajuste.
Cajuste, I like him, man. But again, I think there's a lot of value. You got to find the right system for him. But with Kevin Hogan, I thought he was a great option downfield. Now they had Ty Montgomery, who took a lot of the immediate work for that passing offense, and as athletic as he was able to make some things happen and give some things to Cajuste. But I don't know. We'll have to see. He's somebody I like. I don't like him for the Rams, but he's somebody I like.
Kyler Fackrell.
Oh man. See, here's the thing about guys like Fackrell is how do you not come up with the cliches? He's such a workhorse. He's got such a work ethic. He's such a high motor guy.
Scrappy.
He's so scrappy. He's so scrappy. And that's the thing is, I don't know how to avoid it because he is, man. Now I'd say this: he's the kind of guy I'd love for the Rams. He's a production beast. He's not going to chart well, but he's a what do you want to say, a football player? He's the kind of guy that you just want on your team to be able to give him an opportunity to make plays, because he does.
And last one, it's interesting because a couple years ago the Rams took Aaron Donald, I believe 12th overall, and he is arguably the best defensive tackle in the NFL immediately after that, and you got Michael Brockers, and I don't think he's re-signed, right? So I think you've got him on his last year, perhaps? Is that right?
Yeah, that's it. Yep.
So it's possible that defensive tackle is, I don't know what your thing is with defensive tackle, but it would think that if you've got a guy that you took a 14th and you took 12th, that the Rams value defensive tackle quite a bit, perhaps more than most teams. And Sheldon Rankins right now is maybe being valued at a place where he could be going in the 20s or even in the early second round, yet he's got the 34.5-inch vertical, a 9'10" broad jump. He did 28 reps on the bench. He's 300 pounds. He could be the most explosive and maybe this year's Aaron Donald. What are your thoughts on Sheldon Rankins? And if the Rams took Sheldon Rankins 15th overall or any defensive tackle to sort of bolster that position, would that surprise you?
It wouldn't surprise me at all. I think one of the guys that I almost took instead of Mackenzie Alexander for the blogger mock was Andrew Billings out of Baylor. Now, I think the difference is their skills, right? Rankins is a bit more like Donald. He's quicker. He's more athletic. He's more immediate. Billings is just, he's ridiculously strong. He's incredibly low built. He's the kind of guy that I could see as a Michael Brockers replacement 2017 and there beyond. If, like you said, if the front office isn't necessarily sold on Michael Brockers being a long-term guy for the Rams, it would be interesting, to put an Aaron Donald and a guy with an Aaron Donald-like skill set alongside him to see how that would work. I worry about, for a team that has struggled sometimes in the running game defensively, what they would do without a guy like Michael Brockers to anchor that. Because essentially what Michael Brockers does so well is what he did at LSU. He just plugs gaps, and he forces running backs to go to their second and third gap assignment. Which is a great way to defend the rush, especially when you have somebody that does it as well as Brockers does. So I could see Billings doing it. I don't know that Rankins would be the guy, but in terms of a defensive tackle, I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Rams did that.
I'm all set, Danny.
Yeah, I think we got to let Joe go. We've had him for a solid hour.
Y'all made me talk about Rams football for an hour. I'm going to need a nap, coma, narcotics induced.
He loved it. All right, well, that's it for Joe McAtee. Turf Show Times. Follow at 3K_. I always maybe I don't get the underscore right. Is that correct?
I'll see it. I got my eyes on the Twitter, man. If they miss me, I'll see it.
All right. Thank you, Joe, for joining us and talking Rams. I know it is draining.
It can be, but I always appreciate when I get to do it with you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Look forward to seeing you in LA next year.
All right, man.
All right.
Thanks, Joe.
That is Joe McAtee, Turf Show Times, our, I guess, sister blog over there at SB Nation for the Rams. Mm-hmm. Any takeaways as far as what Joe said on the Rams?
I love talking Rams with Joe. Actually, we went to the Combine, and it was just fun to hear his take. He kind of convinced me on the whole running back in the first round thing. Actually, it's a compelling argument looking at what Gurley did there and how little impact it had on their offense. It's just always fun talking to him about it because he's very rational about it. Obviously, I think some people might call him negative, in terms of just how the Rams don't want to win, but he's pragmatic. I think it's like the Rams haven't shown that they actually care about like winning. With the whole Jeff Fisher thing and just the way they treat the quarterback position and stuff. It's just pretty. It's always interesting, kind of getting his point of view because he obviously sees them a lot closer than we do. But the other thing is, we joked the whole time about how the Rams will win 7 games, but two of those will be wins against the Seahawks next year.
Yeah, right. Let's
Rams.
Stop. It's interesting as well because as I talked about the history of quarterbacks dating back 1999, and then in part of that, the last thing I did was put in the presumptive starter for 2016. And if you presume the Jets are going to re-sign Ryan Fitzpatrick, which I think is obvious because nobody else is talking about him, right. You think it's just going to work out. There's 4 teams that really have QB competitions right now. You would think it being the Rams, the Broncos, not the Rams, the Browns, the Broncos, the Rams, and the 49ers. So half of the teams are in the NFC West that really don't have a quarterback. And you really got to have some stability at quarterback. You got to at least know who your guy is. The Texans don't have a good quarterback, in my opinion, or at least we don't know. I don't like what they did with Brock Osweiler.
Right.
They know who their quarterback is. So half of the teams in the NFC West, I can't see the 49ers or the Rams competing this year. That doesn't mean they won't beat the Seahawks, but it's interesting because that is it's so much more unstable. And then you look at the Cardinals, and they've got a 37-year-old quarterback that has had injury history. So I think that's one of the reasons that as Seahawks fans, you can feel positive, not just about right now, but about the next 7 or 8 years. You got that something going on for that long, a positive situation at quarterback. We see time in and time out that those teams continuously compete. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. But how about as far as the draft, I mean, who were there any of the guys that that you're starting to hone in on with the draft just 3 weeks away?
Man, I can't believe the draft is only 3 weeks away. That's insane. When we did the NFL mock, or the bloggers mock, I took Jonathan Bullard, and I think a lot of people were kind of angry because Sheldon Rankins was still on the board there, and that's understandable. Obviously, he's kind of one of those guys that, like you said, he could either go in the 20s or he could go. I mean, he could even go earlier, or he could potentially fall into the second round. You just don't really know. For me, it was kind of just an idea of, like, I like the versatility that Bullard brings in terms of, he can play outside and inside, and I think that having a pass rush on the outside is key. But obviously Rankins is kind of like maybe like one of those, like you brought up, Quan Short kind of guys who can push the pocket and collapse the pocket and really wreak havoc on the quarterback. So I mean, either of those picks would probably be good, but I'm definitely looking at like the trenches. So either defensive line, pass rusher, or a offensive lineman. And in this case, that mock draft, offensive linemen weren't really there. I don't know if Spriggs is a first round guy that you want to take at that spot. He might fit the profile for the Seahawks, but I don't know if I'm high enough on him to take him at that spot. But if any of the other, kind of big name tackle, taking them, like LaRaven Clark is an interesting guy. You talked about Jermaine Ifedi. So there's definitely some really interesting players. I think the problem with a lot of these guys is, for me, a lot of them kind of look like project style dudes, but that's kind of like generally speaking with the whole offensive line. So
yeah.
To me, it's like if you take an offensive lineman, it's going to be kind of a project.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, but
it's like Kelly, a center.
But, project-wise, whatever. Like the Seahawks put projects on the offensive line every year. So
right. They need to still do it, but it's just going to be, yeah.
I mean, with my feelings today after writing about Gary Gilliam, I really think that the starting left tackle will be Gary. The starting left guard will be Justin Britt. The starting center will be Patrick Lewis. The starting right guard will be Mark Lewinsky. And I think the starting right tackle will be a competition between Jamarcus Webb and
a rookie,
whoever they draft. And I think they're definitely going to take someone in the first 2 rounds. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if they said, fuck it, we're not going to take a tackle in the first round because, I mean, they've taken James Carpenter and Russell Okung in the first round, but I feel like those were, specialist situations. And then at the same time, they took Justin Britt in the second round. They haven't had that much success in that range, and it's interesting. Maybe they're going too project-y with the guys that they take there. But then again, you would have thought James Carpenter was somewhat safe, and it just didn't work out at right tackle.
Injuries fucked him over, though, I feel like.
Yeah. But well, we'll see what they do. But I really do believe in Rob's formula in terms of, at least, it's not really rocket science. It's just we already know they like guys with certain measurables. They take guys out of their board if they don't fit certain things. If they don't think, for whatever reason, if they look at the broad jump and they say, look, if you don't do this, we don't want you. Not for this position. So it wouldn't surprise me. And I do think that they probably will take another defensive lineman to switch over to the offensive side.
Like in the late rounds, or?
Yeah. 6th, 7th round. It'll be interesting. Again, undrafted free agency. Nobody does it more interesting than the Seahawks. It's crazy to think of how much our mindset has changed, because I could not have given a shit less about anybody drafted after the 4th round, 3rd round. When I was growing up, at least, when you're not thinking about this so much, definitely 1st or 2nd round, and that's it. And then even even growing up and paying more attention, undrafted free agency was nothing until then Doug Baldwin comes along and you go, they got lucky one time or whatever.
That's one of the funnest times of the draft, is watching the undrafted free agents kind of land everywhere.
Yeah, and it's because these are, if you're paying a lot of attention to the draft, these are still pretty well-known names to you.
Mm-hmm.
And for them to land certain places, because usually it'll only be like nationally, they'll only talk about the quarterback that was, in the Heisman race that didn't get drafted, or the running back or whatever. But or like Vontez Burfict or something like that, a big story because of why he fell, Lael Collins. But there are only, that you're really just sitting there, and then you're like, okay, well, they signed Thomas Rawls. That doesn't mean anything to me and never will. And then it does.
I'd like to point out that I liked Thomas Rawls before the draft. So that is, I'm cool, apparently.
I know that, and I always I think even last year when we were doing this podcast, you would say, like, you kept on wanting to ask people about Thomas Rawls, and
I was telling everyone he's my favorite player.
It's like, Danny, forget about it. It's not a big. Why do we have to waste 5 minutes on Thomas Rawls? You
okay, that's a lie.
About Rod Smith.
I mean, yeah, that's a lie. But I did like him before the draft.
But yeah, so it'll be interesting to see what they do. Yeah, 3 weeks away.
God, that's crazy.
The Seattle Seahawks. They're located in Seattle, the Pacific Northwest, I playfully call it. That whole area. Chris Clemens is back. What are your thoughts there?
That's a good question. I like it, I guess, from just a veteran, presence. The Seahawks talk about grit a lot, and we've heard that Richard Sherman calls that being a dog. Like, we got some dogs. You've heard Marshawn Lynch say that. You heard Richard Sherman say that. I think that Chris Clemens is a dog. Like, he's like a guy, like, he's a tough guy. He's gonna instill that toughness in the locker room. He's salty. He's kind of just one of those guys that you want on your side in a fight. And so I like that from that perspective. I don't know what he's got left in terms of a pass rusher. You wrote an article yesterday about it. What was your thought on it?
Yeah, I mean, it's just when I tried to just find it, all I really did was in the beginning was like, how many guys 35 or older have had a sack? Right. I looked at all.
How old is he? 34.
He's 34. He'll be 35 in October.
Oh, okay, so he will be 35.
I looked at all that, and first I looked at just defensive ends, and I think there's only been like 47 seasons or something like that ever, or something. There weren't more than 50 guys that ever had more than like 4 sacks or whatever at 35. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't happen. And then I saw like, okay, well, what if I just expanded this to anybody that got a sack? And most of them were linebackers, but yet those linebackers had been defensive ends earlier in their career.
Like 3-4 linebackers?
Yeah, for sure. And that's the criticism that I got there on the old blog, was that there's different systems or whatever.
It's just hard to differentiate, though. I mean, and it's always hard.
It's not like the Seahawks play a 4-3, like just straight up. This is the Seahawks 4-3. They never switch, and it's a 4-3, and that's it.
Well, and one of the things that I think someone talked about, and it's just hard to differentiate, is the Seahawks Sam and the defensive end are similar, almost the same body type. They don't do the same thing, but
yeah,
they're the same body type. So I mean, that kind of strengthens your argument that maybe they do see him as a linebacker.
Wouldn't be that hard to see that, like, hey, like when you're younger and you're more athletic and you're going up against guys in their 20s, you can sort of start out in a stance and push off and not get, bull rushed. But maybe now at Chris Clemens' career, he needs a little bit more of an advantage, being standing up, assessing where he is, getting 1 or 2 steps to make a decision. It's just, you're a little bit further away, but if you're still fast, if Chris Clemens is still fast, then having to step back and take an extra step or 2 into it, maybe that's not so bad. But I think the only expectations really are that he's going to play. I mean, his expectations are zilch. Like, I don't even know if
he might not even make the team.
Yeah.
Right.
So if he does make the team, my expectations would be, hey, this is a guy that's going to get 15 or 20 snaps, maybe less than that, maybe 10 to 15 snaps, but they'll put him in there when it's like, hey, it's 3rd and 8, and we think we know he's going to throw it, and we think we can get to him, and we're going to throw Clemens in there. Like last year, like I said, it was, I think, who was the Cardinals guy? Not John Abraham, because that was earlier.
Freeney.
Freeney?
Freeney. I always get Feeney and Freeney mixed up now. But yeah, Freeney.
Mr. Feeney. 8 sacks, 8 tackles. I mean, that's crazy. There's nothing else that there is to do.
And he didn't even play till like the second half of the year, so he got like 8 sacks in like
11 games.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it. That's your only job. And I think Chris Clemens, when he was in his prime with the Seahawks, he was good against the run. He was good against the pass. He was a full-time defensive end. And now they got Michael Bennett to do that and Cliff Averill, and that's all good there. They don't need him there. It's just going to be like, it's really just setting up there in sort of the Bruce Irvin-ish side of things. But, there's so much fluidity with this defense. They change positions every year. They change what they do every year. It's never the same looks. So we don't know. But I do think at the end of the day, what will he be listed as if he makes the team? I'd say probably, in my opinion, a linebacker.
You know what's interesting? And right now, Frank Clark is listed as a linebacker on Seahawks.com, which I don't know what the hell that means.
Yeah, that is interesting, and I think Frank Clark could make some huge strides this year. Are there any other sort of guys that are going into their second or third year that you expect besides like a Mark Lewinsky? We've talked a lot about him.
That'll be interesting.
Maybe at the defensive tackle spots, or Kevin Pierre-Louis, or maybe a Thorold Simon, or something like that, to some of the guys that you expect to be bigger household names in Seattle next year.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it'd just be great if Jordan Hill could not get injured the whole year, because he's a good player. So he's a guy, again, he kind of fallen off the radar a little bit. He was really good 2 years ago. Last year, I think he just kind of was quiet because he had injuries and stuff. And so he's a guy to look for this year. I think could be kind of like one of those bonus dudes that you forgot are kind of on the team. I still am holding out irrational hope that Paul Richardson is awesome. It's probably not true, but I mean, I just, they spent so much on him that it'd just be really nice if he kind of emerged as what they pictured him to be before he got hurt again. So he's a guy that I still really, like, and if he could break out, that'd be awesome. I don't have high hopes for Kevin Pierre-Louis at this point. I think he's a core special teams guy.
Marsh.
No, I don't have high hopes for him either. I think he's the kind of guy he's kind of like Mike Morgan in my mind. Like those two guys are very similar. Like special teams ace, can come in and play and make impact plays like a little bit, but I don't see them being like big time.
Michael.
No, I mean, I kind of, the whole twice bitten thing or whatever. But he's just so explosive. But I mean, if he can't learn how to carry the ball with his left hand, after 3 years, I don't have a lot of faith in it. I don't know enough about Ty Smith to be excited about him. I think he could be a good nickel corner.
Eric Pinkins.
I don't have high hopes for Eric Pinkins, but it'd be great if he could be like a Sam linebacker.
Obum Gwacham.
He's not on the team anymore. He's on the Saints. He did get 3.5 sacks for the Saints last year. So
Michael Boulware.
Michael Boulware. He is potentially going to be on TV. I don't know. I don't know what the hell he's doing. Ken Hamlin. I don't know. That's a way back track. Ken Hamlin.
Danny Kelly.
Yeah. Excited about the season. I'm gonna give it up my all. Go out there, 110%. Okay, we've gone long enough. Let's wrap this up.
Yeah, we are gonna wrap it up now. That's why I said.
I could feel it trailing off there, so that was good.
Yeah, we got to get going. Like we got places to be. We're cool dudes, and we got things to do. So real in the field goals. Thank you, Joe, for coming on and talking about the Rams with us as well as the NFL draft. Thank you to listening.
Thank you for the Patreon supporters. Thank you so much.
Links in the page. It's just patreon.com/fieldgoals. Appreciate all the support from our Patreon donors. Subscribe to the show on iTunes to get it downloaded. Check out 3000 NFL Mock Draft. There's going to be a lot of coverage leading up to the draft, obviously, as well as potentially another draft day commentary. We're still trying to work that out. And also follow on Twitter at Field Goals. Go to fieldgoals.com. And this has been yet another episode of Real in the Field. Goals.